Hello and welcome to the Central Region Climate Outlook for June 19th, 2014. I'm John Ives with the National Weather Service, and today our briefer will be Brian Fuchs, climatologist with the National Drought Mitigation Center at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Brian, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone. And going to do the briefing this month, and haven't been able to join for a while, so if I fumble through a few things, I apologize, but we should have a good briefing, and there's a lot to talk about, so I'm going to dig in. If you haven't noticed on my opening slide here, there's a nice, I won't say very nice, but a very graphic photo of Pilger, Nebraska from Monday afternoon of this week of a strong EF4, potentially EF5 tornado that swept through and destroyed 75% of the town, and 2 deaths associated with it, with numerous other tornadoes in and around the area this last few days. So it has been active on the plains and in the Midwest so far this season. So just some general information. We have a listing of all the collaborators up there. We have some state climatologists, some folks from the regional NOAA offices, as well as the Drought Mitigation Center, some of the regional climate centers, and we all collaborate to get this call off each month. The next call is going to be held on July 17th with Dennis Toddy, the South Dakota State climatologist. He will be leading the call. You can access the future webinars by the link below, and also there's an archive of all the past webinars at 2 different hosting sites. And at the end of the briefing, there will be time for questions. So if you do have questions, please jot them down, and John will moderate the Q&A at the end. So for the agenda, going to look at the current conditions over the last month, and really focusing on what's gone on since we had the last briefing in May. Looking at some of the impacts that have been taking place in the region, and probably going to spend a fair amount of time on the outlooks as they were all updated today, and there's quite a bit of new and different information that are available for us to look at. And again, another photograph of the Pilger, Nebraska tornadoes, twin tornadoes within a mile of each other. So looking at temperatures, again, this great information coming from the regional climate centers through the ACES system. We are seeing that through much of the region, almost every station is reporting above normal temperatures over the last 30 days, and that was something we really needed in the area. We had been quite cool through much of the spring and early summer, and especially for agricultural sake, we needed to see some of these temperatures. So the warmest temperatures up in North Dakota and the upper Midwest and Minnesota and Wisconsin, some of those departures approaching 4 to 5 degrees above normal during that time, and some cooler temperatures in the southern reaches and far eastern reaches of the region, with some departures of 1 to 2 degrees below normal. And the 30-day precipitation, we can see where it has been active, but it also shows that for those areas that have not seen the thunderstorm activity, there have been some dry areas. I think Michigan stands out, as well as portions of eastern Iowa, also through portions of central South Dakota and into North Dakota, and then the far extent of the region through much of Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. You can almost see that delineation line of where the active weather has been versus where it has not been. Some of those wettest areas in Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, up into Minnesota, we're looking at departures of over 9 inches just over the last 30 days, and there's been quite a bit of discussion just here this week of some of the rainfall that has been taking place up in South Dakota. And before the call started, Dennis was saying that a state record for monthly totals for any month is well within reach, and we have quite a few days to go yet in June. So quite the interesting map, and some of these areas have hit some of the hardest long-term drought regions as well. So when we get further along the briefing, I'm going to show where those improvements have been made. So these departures from normal over the last 30 days, again, you can see that some of these areas up to 6 or more inches above normal just in the last 30 days, and quite a few areas are at least 1.5 to 3 inches above normal. They really do stand out, but you get into portions of central and eastern Iowa, northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, and especially in Michigan, you do see quite a few areas that are 3 to 4.5 inches below normal in the last month. And again, with some of the lack of recharge that did not take place in the fall and in the winter, helping that deep soil moisture layer, we're going to be watching these areas, especially if we do heat up here. Looking at 90-day precipitation departures, again, your eyes instantly get drawn to parts of western Nebraska, the borders of eastern North Dakota, eastern South Dakota, as well as into Minnesota and Wisconsin, where some of these areas are 8 inches above normal just over the last 90 days. And then you look at some of those areas in Kansas where on the last 30 days, if we go back just one slide, we see that in southern Kansas there are 3 to 4.5 inches above normal for the last 30 days, but when we bump that up to 90 days, we see deficits pop right back up, anywhere from 6 to 8 inches in parts of southeast Kansas and southern Missouri. And so we can really see that the concentration of a lot of this precipitation has been in the last 30 to 45 days. As we go further back, we were very concerned through a lot of this area of what we were going to do if the rains did not kick in as far as drought concerns go. The 12-month precipitation departures, I think, really tell a story as well, that we do have some longer-term deficits that we're still trying to erase in the region. And even some of those areas, my eyes instantly go to southeastern South Dakota, where some of those areas are on pace for record rainfall, but over the last 12 months still showing a deficit. And that deficit's slowly been being erased, but it still is there, and really into southeast Iowa, into central Missouri. Some of these areas 16 inches below normal just in the last 12 months, and that is going to be problematic going forward if we don't see regular rainfall through the summer months, and that extends all the way into portions of Indiana and Illinois as well. So realistically, that central corn belt, with what we've seen up to this point, could be an area for concern moving forward. It really depends on what temperatures do, and also do we stay in this active weather pattern, which we will talk about during the outlook section of the briefing. Year-to-date precipitation, just looking at some of these numbers as well. Again, the upper Midwest is really showing the abundance of moisture, whereas since January 1st, we again get drawn to southern Missouri, southeastern Kansas, and even into parts of central Nebraska into eastern South Dakota. Some of these areas since January started off the year very dry, and so the recent wet pattern has helped ease some of these dry conditions in the region, but has not totally erased those seasonal deficits for the calendar year, that is. Looking at one more time frame, and that is the water year, going back to last October. Again, this is generally our recharge period before, especially for the row crops, before they start taking in a lot of moisture from the soil. So what we're looking at here is quite a bit of wetness throughout much of western South Dakota, western North Dakota, into the Nebraska Panhandle, even into portions of Wyoming, Colorado, and Montana. And again, that bleeds all the way in through the upper Midwest and even into Michigan. And then in between that, you kind of see how that dryness from northern Illinois into central Iowa, into portions of southern Nebraska, almost all of Kansas, almost all of Missouri, really is showing that dry pocket, which is extending even further down to the south, just isn't being shown on this map. Some of these departures since last October, again, approaching 12 inches or more in some of the southern reaches of the region. And again, we're really going to have to watch these going forward to see what kind of issues may be developing if we don't see regular rainfall and temperatures ramp up here as we approach July. Now, looking at some of the hydrology of the region, I think this picture has definitely changed quite a bit since the beginning of the year, and realistically, if you look at much of the region, you see that many and most of the stream gauges are flowing in that 75th percentile or higher, and many gauges showing their highest flows on the 28-day stream flow average for this time of the year, and really focus along some of those gauges along the Missouri River Basin, even into portions of the central and eastern Corn Belt. But as you go further south, you can really see in those areas of central to western Kansas, eastern Colorado, where the longer-term drought conditions have really hampered the recovery of any hydrology in the region, and there's still some issues going on. Just as a side note, you want to jump out to the western U.S. and just look and see what 3 years of abysmal snowfall will do for the hydrology of that region, and in California and southern Oregon and into Nevada and Arizona and Utah. That really does stand out as historical lows on many of those gauges right now. A little bit of a zoom into the region, combining the Missouri Basin along with the upper Mississippi. And we can see that along the Missouri, especially as you go south out of the Dakotas into the Nebraska-Iowa bordering area, there has been quite a bit of talk about lowland flooding and some minor flooding issues going on, as many of these gauges, again, are running at the high 90th percentile for this time of year. You get into portions of southeastern Iowa and western Illinois, and you see a little bit different story, that these abundant rainfalls that some of these areas have seen have not really hit those areas. And even with some of the drier soils there has been less runoff in the component, thus adding less water to the rivers and stream flows in those areas. So again, the gauges are running a little bit lower. And speaking about flooding on the Missouri, again, these recent rainfalls that have not just been 1 or 2 days, but over the last several weeks in portions of eastern Nebraska and eastern South Dakota, even into western Iowa, we see a lot of that runoff is reaching into the Missouri at this point, and you see that the Forecast Center has put out these flood advisories going up and down the Missouri as you leave South Dakota all the way into the state of Missouri, where a moderate flooding is existing due to just the runoff component. And again, the abundance of these heavy rains and that runoff component reaching the main stem of the Missouri is causing a few issues right now. And speaking of the Missouri, we can see that some graphics from the Army Corps of Engineers and how they are monitoring the conditions and the carryover, as well as the storage capacity and available storage within the Missouri system. And you can see on the June 18th level of 2014, storage is right at about 58.2 million acre feet. You see the historical max back in 2011, we were at 72.8, and the historic minimum back in 2007, about 33.9. So we're about midway in between those two, looking at where conditions are right now. And just a comparison, in the lower left-hand part of this slide, we're about 5 million acre feet higher than we were last year at this time. So again, a lot of water going into the system, and that is not only from the recent rainfalls, but also from the strong runoff component coming off the mountains in the upper reaches of Missouri as that water is slowly making its way through the system. And we can look at the different reaches above the Missouri, the reach above Fort Peck, as well as the reach from Fort Peck to Garrison. And you can see that the 2013-2014 water year is highlighted in the shaded blue, and you can see the average from 81 to 2010 in red. You can see that 97 value, as well as the 2001 and 2011 values, also on the chart. And so you can see that as we approach mid-June on this graphic here, we're running right at above average, or right at average from that area above Fort Peck for this time of year. And as we go to the Fort Peck to Garrison, right at average as well. But we're also looking at where we were in comparison to 2011. So even with the flooding concerns we're seeing, we're still quite a ways away from what happened in the historical floods that we saw in 2011. And just a quick summary, the runoff forecast is about 123% of normal for this year at 31.1 million acre feet. 13% of the flood control storage has been filled already. There's been reduced releases to provide downstream flood reductions because of the ample runoff and the heavy rains that have been hitting the system. And their forecast is to return to regular releases in about 1 to 2 weeks as things calm down. But then again, that's going to be dependent on what does happen with this active weather pattern. I'm kind of playing my cards a little bit here, but as we get into the outlook, we'll see that this may be modified as well. Severe weather in the region. Well, typically when you do have the abundance of precipitation during this time of year, it is usually and almost always associated with thunderstorm activity. And that we have had. So you can see that the severe weather reports that have been logged so far this year, we have wind in the blue dots, hail in the green dots, and tornadoes in the red dots. And so a lot of these crops, especially that have had a great start to the growing season with fairly decent conditions and ample moisture, some of them have been wiped out not only by the heavy rains but also by wind and hail. And again, some of the tornadoes. It's been a fairly active year. I don't think it's near a record-setting year by any means, but it has been active, especially over the last 5 or 6 weeks. And I think there's been quite a bit of destruction and hardship on some folks, not only from the wind and hail, but the tornadoes as well. So again, I think we have to consider the good and the bad. That the moisture situation has been very good, but along with it, this time of year, as expected, some of that severe weather has impacted folks as well. So as we speak of agriculture, I'm going to jump into some of the numbers that have been presented up to this point, as well as the status of some of the crops where we're at right now. Soil moisture. Back on the last call that Jim Angel led, this was the soil moisture graphic that Jim showed, and he really did a good job here, and that's why I didn't change it, and I just stole it from his presentation. Was he really showed the dry areas from the Midwest all the way down to the southern plains, really the western corn belt, and he also showed those wet areas up in the Dakotas and Montana and Wyoming. And so this was the anomaly in millimeters of the total soil moisture in the full column that was being observed back on May 10th of this year. And I want to fast forward that to what we are seeing this week. And I almost left that same dry area that it's almost hard to believe with some of these areas with the precipitation that they have experienced. If you go back a slide, looking at parts of Kansas and Nebraska, we were anywhere from 100 to 150 millimeters. Eastern Iowa a little bit, or excuse me, western Iowa a little bit larger of a deficit. And even in that far southeastern corner of South Dakota, we were looking at 100 to 150 millimeter deficit in that total column of soil. As we fast forward, we still see some of that deficit. So I kind of made that point earlier that even with the abundance of rain that we've seen, especially with the heavier rain events, you get more of a runoff component and you get less infiltration into that soil, which is really what we didn't see last fall and through the first part of spring to recharge that full column of soil all the way to the deepest depths. So what we're seeing that is there has been some recovery, and some of those wet areas, I guess they extended even further to the east to include more of Minnesota and Wisconsin, but some of those areas that were identified as dry a month ago have shown improvement, but there still are some pretty decent deficits, and most of that's going to be at the deepest depths. The top foot to 18 inches is fairly saturated through a lot of these areas, especially those that have picked up the most precipitation. But as you go deeper into that soil column, there is deficits, and again, we need to take note of that moving forward because that could become problematic as we reach the later portions of the summer. Looking at winter wheat, I know it's been a tough year for wheat producers throughout the country. Not only have they been fighting drought through much of the wheat areas, but also a few cold spells that hit them quite hard, especially when wheat was in a crucial heading period. So we can see where we're at for 2013, 2014. On this condition index, and realistically there was only one other year recently that was worse, and that was that 2005, 2006, and realistically we're not doing much better than we were in 2012, 2013, or actually 2012, 2013 was only slightly better than where we're at right now. So you can see that as we're moving forward, the trend has been that the condition of the wheat has declined, and it's stabilized here since about the middle of May, just because many of those acres can get much worse than what they were at. looking at wheat abandonment for this year, we can see that we are looking at about 22% of the time since years since the 1950s with winter wheat abandonment greater than 22%, and last year and this year are hitting that criteria, where we can see that last year we were at 25% and this year we were about 23%. 2013 was the second highest winter wheat abandonment in the modern era, behind 2002, where we were almost at 30% of the crop. So you can see that over time the trend has been very erratic. There hasn't been too much of a continuous slope one way or the other, but the last few years definitely have been problematic for the winter wheat crop, and that, again, that's been for various reasons. This is looking at some June 10th data, and this was put together by Brad Rippey and the World Ag Outlook Board at USDA out in Washington, D.C. And at that point in time, about 48% of the winter wheat crop was still in drought conditions. And again, along with the drought and the cold snaps that we saw this growing season, that has impacted the wheat quite a bit. So the USDA wheat outlook right now, the forecast is down for total production, is down 2% from the May 1st number and down 10% from the 2013 total. Total production is forecasted to be 1.38 billion bushels for this year. And realistically, I don't think that number will be changing too much unless we would get quite a bit of hail on the northern acres of the winter wheat growing area, or wind could even impact that as well. So again, the severe weather could come into play as far as total wheat production goes. Pasture and rangelands have been improving through much of the region. These are the states, and they're poor to very poor conditions as of this week, and we can see again up in the Dakotas, range and pasture lands are doing excellent, as well as into Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, and even into portions of Nebraska and Iowa and Kansas. Those numbers have been steadily improving from where they were a month ago. I should have threw up the old graphic as well. And it doesn't become more problematic until you get into the west and southwestern portions of the U.S. So after several years of deficiencies in forage production and forage availability, I think this should help many of the cattle producers in the region, and as well as the dairy producers, to have ample forage. One problem we have seen out here in Nebraska, and I'm sure it's been impacting other areas, is some of those first cuttings of alfalfa have had a lot of rain put on them, and that does become problematic for producers as they need that alfalfa to reach a certain level of dryness, and they got to keep turning it over to get to a good point, or else that forage will spoil. So that is one problem we are seeing. So looking at the crop progress for this time of year compared to last year, we're looking at corn here, and last year we had seen 91% of the crop emerged compared to 97% this year. Corn, that is good to excellent. Last year at 64, currently we're at 76, and again, this is for the entire country. Soybeans planted last year, we were at 84. This year we're at 92, and soybeans emerged were 20% higher, from 63 to 83%, comparing this year to last year. So overall, the crops are in the ground for the most part. We've seen almost all the corn emerged in our region, and we've seen, I'll go to the next slide. Looking at the corn progress, and we have the emerged in the dark green and the good to excellent conditions in the lighter green. And so almost all areas, I think Minnesota and Indiana are lagging a little bit, as well as Ohio with the mid-90s as far as emerged, which is right in line with the 5-year average. And the conditions in good to excellent, you can see that much of the Corn Belt is doing quite well, with Nebraska and Indiana kind of the laggards, with only 66 and 72% of the crop in good to excellent shape right now. But again, I think it was mentioned by a few people that we do need some growing degree day units. We need some heat on this crop, as there is ample moisture. We do need some heat, and this crop will really take off as far as the corn's concerned. And this topic I brought up already when I was showing the NL soil moisture product, but we are still seeing some subsoil moisture deficiencies, and this is what we're looking at for the different states and the regions that I highlighted as having some deficiencies yet. In Iowa, we have 2% very short and 14% short on the subsoil for a total of 16%. Illinois is the same at 2 and 14. Missouri is a little bit worse at 6% very short and 21% short for 27% total. Nebraska 13 and 23 for a 36% total, and 23 and 32 in Kansas for a 55% soil moisture shortage at that, especially at that soil moisture level. So as you can see, the recharge down to that deepest 3 foot was really not accomplished in all these areas, and we will continue to see these deficits unless we continue to see these precipitation events and that percolation of moisture down to those deepest depths. Looking at soil temperatures at the 4-inch layer at bare soil, we can see that there's still some 60-degree temperatures, even some 50s up in North Dakota at some of these locations, but for the most part, soil temperatures are doing quite well. Some of those areas in the northern reaches of Wisconsin still in the mid-50s, and again, some of these areas really have been hit hard by precipitation and not getting a lot of these sun units that we need. And again, we need temperatures at 50 degrees for corn to develop and 40 degrees for wheat. So we're doing pretty good through much of the region outside of a few isolated cases. And so here we come to today's U.S. Drought Monitor release that Eric Lubhusen had put out from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And we can see quite a bit of no issue or no drought issues in much of the area from the Missouri River eastward. We still do see some areas of southeastern Iowa that have not been beneficiaries of some of these rain events recently. And then if you think back to that 12-month precipitation departure map that I showed, and realistically from that area of southeastern Iowa all the way into central Missouri, some of those areas we have only as abnormally dry or maybe moderate drought on the map, but there was still some significant deficits. So what that's telling me as we go forward in the summer, if the heat kicks in these areas do not see precipitation develop, we may see drought expand in these areas. But again, that's just an overall assessment of what could happen. But again, we'll look at the outlooks. So much of the region, again, is drought-free. There's been quite a bit of improvements over eastern to central Nebraska and even in the western Nebraska panhandle. Kansas has been slower to improve as well because of the longevity, the long-term drought. And as you go into the southern and southwestern portions of the state, many of those areas are in very similar conditions to what we're seeing in Oklahoma and the Texas panhandles with this 3+ years of drought, that it's going to take multiple precipitation events to really offset those long-term drought impacts that are being felt down there. So looking at the statistics for the contiguous U.S. here, we're at 36% of the region is in drought, slight improvement over last week, 2% improvement over 3 months ago, an increase from the calendar year, and a decrease from the water year. So a little bit of changes that we've seen. And 1 year ago, we're about 10% better than where we were. So overall, we're doing pretty decent. And if we zoom into the region here, again, we only see about 8% of the region as a whole in any kind of drought. We do not see any D4 in the region. We only see a little over 2% of D3, and that's isolated in Kansas right now. Last week we were at about 10%, so again, more improvement in the region. 3 months ago we were at 16%. Start of the calendar year, 13%. Start of the water year at 20%. So we've really been pecking away at the drought in this north-central region, and much of that improvement has been through portions of Iowa and Nebraska during this time, as well as some of that abnormally dry that was leaching into southeastern South Dakota at this time. And one of the products associated with the Drought Monitor is this Drought Monitor change map. And so the shades of blue show different classes of improvement on the drought monitor, while those in brown show different classes of degradation over time. And throughout the entire region, we don't see any browns outside of southern Missouri and then into Kentucky. For the most part, we have been showing improvements, or at least no change in the region, at least over the last month. So this has been since the last briefing. Now we'll get into the outlooks a little bit, and first off, I'm going to look at the 7-day precipitation forecast, then the 8 to 14-day outlook, the monthly and seasonal outlooks, 6 months out, as well as the seasonal drought outlooks, and is El Nino coming? I think that's what we're really going to spend a little bit of time on. So the 7-day QPF, it's hard not to have your eyes drawn to some of these areas of the Midwest, where we're looking at anywhere from 3 to 3.5 inches of precipitation that is potentially available in these areas. And again, looking at southeastern Iowa, one of the areas that has missed out on a lot of this rain, into central Iowa even, quite a number of bullseyes right over that region, and it's really through much of the entire central plains to the Midwestern region. Looking at some of those areas along the Missouri, especially in northeastern Nebraska and southeastern South Dakota, those areas are also expected to pick up quite a bit of precipitation during this time. And again, as we think back to some of those slides on the Missouri River and where we're at now, the Army Corps of Engineers was talking about bringing releases back to normal in 1 to 2 weeks. Well, if we continue to see this kind of potential for rainfall in the region, and it does materialize, we would probably see that time frame shifted forward a little bit more, because 3 more inches of runoff on a saturated landscape is going to just push a lot more water into that Missouri River basin, all from that area just north of Sioux City, all the way down into the Kansas City region. Looking at the hazards outlook for the next 3 to 7 days, you can see that heavy rain is being brought up through areas of southern Nebraska and northern Kansas, as well as in the southern plains into the Tennessee River Valley. Again, we're going to be watching this area for quite a bit of rainfall, and even up into Minnesota and parts of South Dakota and northern Iowa, where we've seen flooding possible associated with this wet pattern on top of the wet pattern that we have seen. 8 to 14-day outlook. Again, this is looking at the probabilities of being above or below normal for temperatures and precipitation. And so we have temperature on the left and precipitation on the right. And it does look like that much of the region is going to be having the opportunity for above normal temperatures during this time. We see that potential lessen as you go into the central to southern plains. But for the most part, a fairly strong signal on those northern areas. And associated with that 8 to 14-day outlook is above normal odds of below normal precipitation in some of these areas as well. So that would correlate quite well with what we haven't seen so far with those areas that have picked up a lot of rain being cooler. Again, if we don't see above normal precipitation, the odds of having below normal the odds of the below normal precipitation associated with above normal temperatures is quite high, and we do see some of the areas of the southern plains and into the mid-Atlantic with that stronger signal, with the best opportunities for above normal precipitation during this time. And the monthly and seasonal outlooks that just came out today, one thing that really caught my eye in the July outlook was this area over North Dakota and Minnesota, and even further south into South Dakota, western Nebraska, and that area of the opportunity for below normal temperatures during this time. And through some discussions here over the last couple of days, not all the crops are progressing as quickly as they should be for this time of year because of the cool start to the season, as well as the abundance of moisture in those areas as well. So if we are looking at a forecast through July, or an outlook through July that is showing higher than normal odds of below normal temperatures, we could see some developmental delays or accumulation of growing degree delays in these areas. So that's something we're going to have to watch out for on an agricultural side of things. And through July, we start seeing this wet signal coming out of the southwest and in through much of the Rocky Mountains and catching the far western reaches of the region, showing some above normal opportunities for above normal precipitation, equal chances through a lot of the rest of the region except for portions of southern Illinois and southern Missouri, where we're seeing a higher likelihood of below normal precipitation during this time. And then as we look at the bottom two sections of this frame with July through September, what we are seeing is that cool signal with above normal chances of below normal temperatures really staying in the region and actually expanding. And for the western reaches of the Corn Belt especially, this could become problematic as we go forward. And it was brought up how we really fought a few years ago with crops not maturing and drying in the fields and being in the fields all winter long and all the associated problems of wet grain. And I think with this outlook here, we really need to start thinking about that and what's it going to mean. Going into July, August, September precipitation, this signal has been there for the last few runs with anticipation of another strong monsoon season and having that precipitation extend through much of the central part of the country here, the western reaches of the central region. So now we're looking at the 3-month temperature and precipitation probability, very similar to what I just showed. Well, it actually is the same graphic that I just showed on the bottom frame there, just zoomed in a little bit, so get a little bit better view of it. And then August through October, again, we see that signal through in the northern plains and the upper Midwest of higher than normal chances of below normal temperatures through that time frame. And this wet signal, that's a fairly broad wet signal coming out of this suite of outlook products. So we're going to have to really see if this develops into a more isolated area, or is it really going to be extended. So if you take into account temperatures that are below normal and precipitation that's above normal, the likelihood of having great growing conditions is there, but we have to start thinking about by the end of October, how are those crops maturing and what are we looking like going into the harvest season. So definitely some ideas to think about. And this is the one that could be the wild card in the bunch, and that's the El Nino development that we've been talking about now for several months. And that likelihood continues to increase. So here we are at May, June, July, a little over 60% chance of development, but we see that steadily increase up to over 80% by October, November, December. And again, we know that in El Nino events, if they behave like past El Ninos have, we typically will see that cooler and wetter signal across the southern tier of the U.S. and a warmer signal across the northern plains. So as we look forward at these outlooks that we just were having our eyes on, where we see this cooler than normal opportunity here, that's also another area that as we get into the fall and winter analogs of El Nino years shows a warm signal. So it's going to be interesting to see how that develops moving forward. But again, a highly likely chance of El Nino developing and being in place by the end of fall or the first part of winter. And we see from the IRI CPC probabilities that they've put out that, again, we're reaching fairly high numbers by September, October, November, December, and into the late part of fall, early winter of this El Nino really kicking in before that starts going down a little bit by the mid to late part of winter. And the forecast plume, which was well, this is the mid-May one. I did not get the mid-June one. That I had it, but I didn't replace it. I apologize for that. So, looking at the mid-June plume is very similar to this one. We do see some of the outliers holding normal or neutral conditions and those that are really showing a robust event. But the plume, the yellow line average of the forecast, stayed about where it was in mid-May, so not much of a change. I apologize for not having the most up-to-date graphic here, but again, very similar to what we had in mid-May. And the seasonal drought outlook came out today, and David Miskus showed a lot of improvement in areas of the Great Basin, into the Rocky Mountains, the southwestern U.S., into the Central Plains, and the Midwest as well, where those areas that are in gray are showing drought remains but showing some improvement or lessening intensity. Those areas in olive green are showing that drought removal is likely. Some drought development in eastern portions of Texas and Louisiana and that, but as we focus on the region here, this wet pattern that we've seen, again, it looks like it's going to be continuing, at least to the point that we can see some more or further improvement of drought or lessening of the intensity in the region. So pretty good news as far as that goes. So in summary, warmer than normal conditions over the region have allowed for agriculture to catch up in crop development and progress, but then again, I think that needs a footnote or an asterisk on it that some areas have not, and we do need some heating degree and growing degree units, especially in the western Corn Belt and the northern reaches of the western Corn Belt. Some of these areas have had an abundance of rain over the last month. Again, these flooding issues along the Missouri River and adjoining tributaries. So far, it hasn't been catastrophic by any means, but it is something that we need to be paying attention to, and especially if the next 5 to 7 day QPF verifies there's going to be a lot more water running into that system. Severe weather has been very active, with many locations reporting damage from wind, hail, and tornadoes. The outlooks. The El Nino forecast is still very bullish for the summer and autumn outlooks, with a moderate episode expected as it continues to develop in the fall and early winter seasons. A cooler, wetter signal over the upper Midwest and Dakotas has developed for the rest of the summer, and continued drought improvements are expected in Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, and Iowa. And just some further information on some links to get to for more of this information. And John, I think I'll let you moderate the questions. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, gentlemen. This is Bryce Anderson at BTN. And I had a question that I would like to have you comment on regarding what the fall scenario might be if El Nino continues to develop. Because I believe it was back in 2004, 10 years ago, that El Nino formed, and during that season, rather than the upper Midwest having a warm signal, milder temperatures, there was actually a fairly early frost that came in, and I think did catch northwest Iowa, parts of southwestern Minnesota, and maybe southeastern South Dakota with at least a light frost during the weekend of August the 20th. And, you know, this year, with everything being as late as it is, with some of these challenges that we've had thrown at us in that part of the country, what do you think? Is that a possibility?
Well, Bryce, this is Brian, and you know that we're left to the opportunity of diagnosing these situations by what's happened in the past. And there's been in the last 10 years, there's been a couple different El Nino and La Nina events that have not behaved, so to speak, as we have seen in the analog years. And so I think looking at what CPC has put out with their updated outlooks and that potential chance for a below normal temperatures being higher in those northern plains and upper Midwest areas, I would not say it's completely out of the realm. I mean, you don't have a lot of certainty one way or the other, and typically the strongest signal with El Nino is later in the autumn to early winter season. So, you know, I think right now I'm going to hang my hat a little bit more on what CPC has been updating, and see exactly again what happens with the next update before I'm going to have a little bit more faith as far as what those temperatures will do.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, Bryce, this is Doug.
Yes.
Hey, just
Hello,
to
Doug.
add on to what Brian said, everything he said was correct. I think there is obviously there's concern with cooler temperatures and late planting and wet conditions and all that kind of thing in terms of getting things out of the field. I believe Dennis and a few other folks have been talking a little bit about the long-term forecast, and we're not going to. This is not a forecast by any means, but there are some tendencies that sort of point towards a relatively wet fall in some places, which also could complicate matters. I don't know if Dennis wants to comment on that as well, but yeah. So I'm not saying it's going to happen with every El Nino, but maybe we could say that there's an enhanced probability, slightly, of that kind of fall taking place. At this point, become more clear with time.
Certainly. Thank you.
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, this is Marion Moss of the Nebraska Wildlife Federation. I don't know if you mentioned it, you might have, but how much a mountain snowpack melt remains? Did you mention that or not?
I didn't mention, but the number that I saw this week was about 15% or less in most of the areas. And someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think that's the number I ran across as I was gathering information this week.
And so that includes the Colorado snowpack as well?
I don't have an exact answer for you on that, and I apologize, as I don't have that information readily available.
Okay, thanks very much.
Someone else on the panelist, do you have a number?
Yes, this is John Eyes at the Weather Service. Actually, pretty much it's done in Colorado, most of Wyoming, except for northwestern Wyoming. There's just a few areas up there that still have a fair amount of water equivalent up there. So locally, I believe in northwestern Wyoming will be where there might be still some issues with high water, but outside of that, though, it's pretty much complete most areas.
And you forecast about 3.5 inches of rainfall throughout the Dakota area in the upcoming 7 to 14 days, I believe. Is that correct?
On the 7-day QPF, which came out this morning, over extreme southeast South Dakota, there's a data point is showing 3.2 inches potentially in that area. And the further you go west and north into central Nebraska, you're right at about 1 3/4 to 2 inches, and far western Nebraska, inch or so. So as you go west, those numbers decline, as well as if you go north. As you go east, the numbers stay fairly strong with 2+ inches all the way into Ohio.
Yeah, and there's a just to and also just to let you know that when they do draw these maps, it doesn't necessarily mean, like, if you look at eastern Iowa, they're going, oh my gosh, that whole eastern Iowa is going to have 3 inches of rain. Not necessarily, because since a lot of this is tied to thunderstorms, there may be areas that get 3 inches, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, the whole state of Iowa is going to have 2 or 3 inches of rain necessarily.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
And just a plug for the weather.gov site, if you want to go there and sort of follow on, you'll probably look over the next 7 days for the southeast part, the Sioux Falls area, southeast part of South Dakota, and you'll be able to see that there's the precipitation probabilities are going to be high through about Monday or Sunday, and then drop off a little bit after that.
Also, if you're interested in finding out more about El Nino too, if you go to climate.gov, under news and features, they do have actually an El Nino blog, and there's several articles there. One says United States El Nino impacts, that was just put online about a week ago. So that would be a good one to take a look at, give you kind of a general idea of what the impacts are during an El Nino. Just to add something on El Nino too, and Bryce, you were kind of hinting at this too, is even though usually the signal is for warmer through the northern states and into the Great Lakes, we do have other factors that do go on in this hemisphere, particularly the Arctic Oscillation. And we've seen that before, that it's basically taken over and pulled a lot of Arctic air down over us. And suddenly we're seeing a below normal temperatures instead of above normal. So we know what the signals typically will do with an El Nino, but sometimes the impacts vary as much as the type of El Ninos that we have.
Hi, Julie Anderson from the Omaha World Herald. I know you gentlemen mentioned that the drought monitor, the drought has improved over the U.S. and the 48 states. Do you have any, to be a regionalist about it, do you have any numbers on Nebraska and Iowa specifically on the improvement?
From last week to this week?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, let me pull the numbers up here real quick. I can do that.
You happen to be asking the right guy.
Yeah.
I thought I might.
In Nebraska, currently we have 29.10% of the state in drought. Last week that number was 33.69.
33.69?
Yes.
Okay.
And in Iowa, we have currently 6.20% of the state in drought, and last week that number was 20.51%.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, well, very good, and thank you everyone for joining us today for the webinar, and we can now listen to the weather radio. Anyway, thank you everyone, and have yourself a great afternoon. Take care now. Bye-bye.